This review contains endgame spoilers for Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance. If you don't want to see that kind of thing, I would strongly suggest clicking off of this video. It's no secret that the original release of Shin Megami Tensei V was the product of a rough development cycle. Not only was this Atlus's first game in Unreal Engine, the world was also kinda knocked on its ass at the time with the pandemic. The game reviewed well critically and sold like 4 trillion copies, but many fans, myself included, were let down and even a bit surprised by its shortcomings. The story was oddly paced and poorly executed, the environments felt repetitive and barely maintained a stable frame rate, and combat, while solid overall, was held back by some aggressive damage scaling that had a tendency to make fights feel longer and spongier than usual. To put it bluntly, I expected better from a company who's been making these games for so long. Now, part of me wants to be sympathetic to their situation and cut them a break. I was still in college during the pandemic, right? And we couldn't even get people to work on a fucking PowerPoint for our senior project. You know, the thing you need to graduate. So to make a whole ass game while dealing with remote work, deadlines, people getting sick, believe me, I get it, but at the end of the day, I can't make any excuses. This is a multi-million-dollar company. Games are an expensive luxury item, and the final product needed more time. Of course, this is Atlus we're talking about, so it shouldn't come as a surprise that, inevitably, it wasn't the final product. Love it or hate it, these guys are the kings of selling you a game 2 times. In fact, go get a dictionary right now, seriously. Open it up, and go to the entry for re-release. If you don't see this logo, throw that shit away! You have a censored copy! Don't believe me? Look. Nocturne Maniacs, Persona 3 FES, Persona 4 Golden, Persona 5 Royal, Strange Journey Redux, Catherine Full Body, Devil Survivor Overclocked, Devil Survivor 2 Record Breaker, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Encore. What is going on? I can keep going if you want. They did it in the 90s too. Atlus has been doing these quote-unquote definitive releases for decades, and with its mixed fan reception, SMT5 was basically the perfect candidate for another one. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Shin Megami Tensei V Vengeance. Or, as I like to call it, Shin Megami Tensei V for real this time. Released on June 14th, 2024, Vengeance gives you the entire original story with a lot of mechanical changes and some additional features, as well as a new campaign, the Canon of Vengeance, which has its own unique content and endings. With this release, they really wanted to hammer home that fan feedback was taken into account, to the point that they did a special live showcase of the new features and adjustments, complete with a nice reference chart. The question is, does it all amount to an experience good enough to warrant buying the game again? Or is it just another attempt to exact vengeance on your wallet? Here's how we're gonna find out. In my initial assessment of SMT5, I broke the review out into 3 sections: combat, exploration, and story. Following that same format, I'm gonna revisit my original criticisms and break down whether I think Vengeance makes it better, worse, or maybe neither. So let's get into it. Combat was easily the best aspect of Shin Megami Tensei V. The press turn system is turn-based combat at its finest. That sense of momentum you feel from hitting enemy weaknesses and gaining more actions, the frustration of missing an attack and ruining your entire life. It's great. You'd be hard-pressed to find something this much fun in another JRPG. The biggest problem I had by far with the original release was the previously mentioned damage scaling they implemented. Fights had a tendency to feel overly long if your level didn't match or exceed whoever you were going up against. Being just a few levels below a boss really made a huge difference as to how much damage you'd put out, and no other game in the series really ever felt like that. Scaling like this does exist in prior games, but it felt like they really cranked it up for this one. Usually, in Megami Tensei games, your strategy matters a lot more than whatever level your team is. Reactions to this online a few years ago were pretty interesting and sort of made me feel like I was going crazy. You had some people who noticed the harsh scaling and complained about it, but there were others who were saying it outright didn't exist, or that if you weren't doing enough damage, you were just playing poorly. At least in my experience, there really wasn't a solid consensus on SMT5's approach to damage scaling. So when Atlus dropped these videos advertising the fact that Vengeance cut that shit back, I was kind of blown away. Like, if a company comes out and uses the removal of a mechanic as a purchase point, there's no denying it. I must have been right to complain about it. So does it make combat better? Well, yeah, it does. The pacing of battles is much improved, and now you can reasonably fight bosses that are 10 or even 15 levels ahead of you, provided you have a solid team. You really can feel the difference, and you have to wonder if they just cracked open the code and changed like one number in a calculation somewhere. I'm beyond happy with this change. They actually listened, and that really fascinates me for some reason. Many of my other combat-related gripes ultimately stemmed from the scaling issue. I mentioned previously that dampeners made combat feel a bit repetitive. Dampeners are items that allow you to block a single element for a turn. If you know what element a boss uses, you can easily gain the advantage on most of them by just using these at the right time. Why did it feel repetitive? Because even though you could completely shut down a boss's most powerful attacks, the fights would drag on as you were just stuck there chipping away at a massive health bar. With the scaling cut back, things are far less tedious, so you don't really have time to sit there and get bored contemplating life. Another criticism they directly responded to relates to this game's special Magatsuhi skills. When you fill up your Magatsuhi meter in combat, you can use a special move. And like 99% of the time in the original release, that move was going to be Omagatoki Critical, which makes all of your attacks critical hits, and as a result, earns you several more actions within that turn. This move was the shit, it was overpowered beyond all belief, and I felt like all of the other moves were situational at best. The devs must have noticed people talking about that, so they went balls out and added a lot of new ones. Now, you have these crazy powerful skills that require specific demons. For one of them, you need to have the Archangels, for example, and some others demand that your demons are all a part of a particular alignment. There's even a skill exclusive to the Vengeance route, called Omnipotent Succession, which executes the same move 4 times in one turn. If you're smart with it, this can be even better than critical. If you have a skill that already hits multiple times, you can do disgusting shit like score 15 hits at once and deal thousands of points of damage. While you're still probably going to be using that critical skill most of the time because it's still just that good and has the most general utility, the increased variety and functionality of Magatsuhi skills is much appreciated. Now, on the topic of building a party, the last thing I want to talk about relates to leveling up your demons. I save this for last because I don't quite consider it a concrete flaw, but rather a direction the franchise seems to be going that I don't necessarily agree with. So here's the deal. In the original release of SMT5, you could find stat boosting items damn near everywhere. I'm talking like, you can dig these things up in the sand, you can get them from Mitama, you can find them in crystals, you can get them from quests, you get the point. Items that straight up increase your demon's level were also frequently available. So what this means is potentially, you can carry forward any demons you like into the endgame, even the first pixie you come across. Personally, I think it can be pretty fun to carry a team of your favorite demons all the way through, but I don't know if making it easier to do that is an objectively good thing for the series, and I'd like to explore that idea a little bit. In my original video, I briefly discussed how the increased frequency of these upgrade items could be seen as a bad thing by some players, because it removes some of your incentive to rely on the fusion mechanic. In the older mainline Shin Megami Tensei games, fusion was a core part of your progression. You had to be making new demons or you'd fall behind. It's one of the series' most iconic mechanics, and giving you ways to skirt around it and use it less could be considered simplifying the gameplay, providing a way to bypass experimentation in favor of flat upgrades. Vengeance takes this potential issue from the original release and makes it into something I consider worse. Let me explain. Vengeance adds a new place you can visit at checkpoints called the Demon Haunt. All of your recruited allies hang out here, and you can talk to them for some funny dialogue and the occasional stat boost. Except, I shouldn't say occasional, because your demon stats increase what feels like every 10 fucking minutes. Don't get me wrong, I love the opportunity to connect more with your team and see each demon's personality. But why the holy hell do their stats go up so often? There seems to be no limit to how often this can happen either. Walk around a bit, do some fights, bam, there it is, stat boost. I think it goes without saying that this greatly increases the longevity of any given demon on your team, Now take that, combine it with the already abundant upgrade items, and the fact that the game frequently just gives you party members to work with, and it's not hard to see why fusion can take a back seat sometimes. I think I can count the amount of times I truly needed to fuse a demon during my playthrough on one hand, no joke. In fact, during the Tiamat boss fight, basically right at the end of the game, there was nobody in my active party acquired through fusion. You get Kresnik and Demeter just by completing side quests, and Tao is a story character. This was an excellent team that left pretty much nothing to be desired, and it required very little planning on my part. Even your protagonist gets force-fed upgrades. Every couple hours you'll sit down here with Aogami or Tsukiyomi in the news story, and this dude will just give you 3 stat points for advancing the plot. This wasn't in the original game, and they fixed the damage scaling, so to me it's like, why continue to stir the pot? The balance is fine, so just leave it alone. Thanks to this feature, I was able to dump enough points into my strength stat to have over 100 by the middle of the game, which just seems a bit inflated to me. And not to mention, on the Vengeance campaign, you're often accompanied by guest characters. Fighting alongside your human allies does wonders for storytelling, and feels very reminiscent of the earliest Shin Megami Tensei titles, which I love, and we'll get to that in a bit. But your active party can only have 4 units in this game, so if you want to use them often, fusion basically goes out the window. There are huge chunks of the new campaign where you can go hours without thinking about it. It almost feels like they overcompensated for complaints about the damage scaling and decided to just drown you in free shit to make damn sure nobody would complain about feeling underpowered ever again. While this likely falls more under the story category, a big part of the atmosphere of SMT for me is a sense of the odds being against you, that you're really struggling to navigate a hostile world. Being continually peppered with these rewards definitely takes away from that, and makes what should be a satisfying feeling become routine and expected. While things like the new Magatsuhi skills are great and do encourage you to fuse new demons, it just feels all too easy in Vengeance to find yourself in a comfortable niche where once you're set up, you're just rolling with the same team for a really long time because it works. Whereas in games prior, this was at times basically equivalent to suicide. I would imagine 95% of you probably just want me to shut the hell up already. And for what it's worth, like I said, I don't consider this to be a major blow against the game. And I'm not outright against giving the player more freedom to customize their team. But I do think these excessive free upgrades and items go against the general philosophy of the series, where demons are far more disposable, you're constantly changing your party, and fusion is your lifeline for survival. While I do control the buttons I press and could just fuse more if I wanted to, there's something less satisfying for me about them shifting it further away from a necessity to just another option. Your thoughts on this might depend on the difficulty you played. You know, if you're fighting the super bosses on hard mode, yeah, you'll probably fuse more, but on just a casual playthrough, normal or lower, I can easily see fusion falling to the wayside. With this in mind, I'm curious how they'll approach team building in the future. Do they intend for these demon haunts and piling resources onto particular units to be a fixture of the series going forward? Or is it just supposed to be a part of the identity of SMT 5? All in all, they did a great job at honing the combat system. Sure, I think there's still room to improve. There's some things I don't prefer, but that's true of just about any game. Combat in Vengeance is a blast, and they fixed the most important issue holding it back in the previous release. It's worth noting they went beyond just addressing criticism here too. If you watch that showcase video, you'll notice some other small but thoughtful additions. One example is that they added unique passive abilities for each demon. Most of these aren't groundbreaking, you know, some of them are good, some are ass, but it's a little bonus that gives your team members more individuality. Anything that encourages experimentation is a plus. Another funny thing they added is the chance for a consecutive encounter if you roll up on a group of demons while exploring. This feels like something nobody really spoke up and asked for, but it's another cool feature that can mix up gameplay a bit. A lot of work was put in here, and honestly, I might even say Vengeance's combat is near the top of the series. Let's move on to exploration. Guys, I'm gonna have to say this with my chest here. I felt like it was pretty weak in the original release. Why is that? Well, despite the maps looking good and offering freedom of movement that was unparalleled for the franchise, I just didn't find them that engaging to explore. Rather than the typical structure of using the world map to visit unique sublocations, Shin Megami Tensei V changed things up by giving you 4 big areas to run around with very few loading screens or transitions. Not a bad idea, but of those 4 big areas, I only really felt like the first one stood out. You start the game off, you look around, and it's breathtaking. You can freely run across the sand, you pick up items here and there and find Mimon, there are little side quests you can find, but then you get to the second area, and it's the same sand and shit with a different color filter. And then you get to the third area, and supposedly there's this big war going on, but there's really just some demons standing around, and the environment is the same thing with a different filter. And then it's the final area. The world is falling apart, the gods are all making a final desperate attempt to claim the throne of creation, and it's sand with a new filter. Well, they do throw in some cubes. There was a small selection of dungeons and sub-areas like the Demon King Castle and the Temple of Eternity, but the gimmicks and puzzles aren't memorable or really challenging whatsoever. There were a lot of times, especially near the middle of the game, where it just kind of felt like wandering around a literal sandbox, where occasionally a cool action figure some kid left behind gives you something to do. I didn't really talk about this in the original video, but I've had a lot of time to ponder it since then, and I think the biggest issue I have with the environments is that they don't adequately convey the escalation of the plot. The design of a video game world goes hand in hand with the progression of its story. Let's use the first Shin Megami Tensei as an example. You start the game before the apocalypse is even in full swing. You're going around shopping centers and other civilian buildings. Things escalate until you're finally face to face with Thor in the lavishly decorated American embassy. Thor drops a fucking nuke, and life as you know it is officially over as you cross dimensions into the Congo Kai for a quick break. Back in the real world, shit's in shambles, and the drama starts to heat up again, which all culminates in a big-ass battle at the Great Cathedral. As the mood of the story changes, so too do the environments. In Shin Megami Tensei V, you're dumped into the apocalypse like 5 minutes into the game, and no matter what happens in the plot, the vast majority of your time is spent running around in the sand. They try to hype up the Demon King Castle, but the king is barely even a part of the story, and the stage isn't very good. The castle should be the highlight of this entire game, but it's more like a footnote. In the years since this game came out, I don't think I've seen a single person specifically talk about it. The only time the design of the stages really reflect the gravity of the story is at the very end, when you're up in the Empyrean, and then the game's over. Shin Megami Tensei 1 puts you on a crazy roller coaster. Shin Megami Tensei 5 gives you a beautiful but uneventful ride on the freeway. So, does Vengeance change that? Yes and no. As you'd expect, the layout of the stages of the original campaign are still by and large the exact same. You can go to the demon haunts now. They added in Magatsu rails you can ride around on, and there are some new pickups to track down, but I wouldn't say that's enough to influence someone's opinion if they didn't like the maps before. The biggest thing that could potentially change your mind are the addition of new side quests. Each area is way more thick with content now. Some of these quests are really fun and creative, especially the ones where you can now control demons, or recruit a new navigator to follow you around. There are a handful that actually take place in the normal world, and they reminded me a bit of the Devil Summoner games. These quests help the game feel just a bit more alive, and bring more personality to underutilized areas, which was definitely needed. Another thing that enhances the experience is the simple fact that you can now play this game on something besides the Nintendo Switch and get 60 frames per second. Playing on PC was really good. There is a big difference in how animations look and how movement feels. This game needed a multi-platform release. If you enjoyed the exploration before, I'm sure you'll enjoy it even more now. If you didn't like it, well, it's undeniably better, but at the end of the day, the original campaign is still repetitive, and the dungeons are just as forgettable. Alright, so now for the real shit. how does the newly added Canon of Vengeance mix things up? Let's just start off with what disappointed me the most. In the Canon of Vengeance, 3 out of the 4 main areas are the same as before. The first area is still there, you still go to Shinagawa after that, and the final area is still Cube Zone with mediocre platforming. The story plays out differently, there are new bosses and plenty of new cutscenes and character interactions, but it's largely the same environments you're traversing, just with different things happening along the way. Now the good news is, the third area is completely different. Instead of going to Chiyoda, this time you go to Dot Shinjuku. And it's really damn fun! They busted their ass on this stage, and it feels much more unique as opposed to the other ones. This is a sprawling and dynamic map. You're running through this bizarre alien grass as equally strange trees tower over you, and then it shifts into a dense urban area with a lot of great side quests. There are plenty of paths to explore, you can find a little temple. It's solid, and you can absolutely tell they got better at designing these open levels since last time. Shinjuku also has its own dungeon, Shakan, which unfortunately is a huge letdown. Shinjuku itself is great, but this stage, not so much. Before this game released, I swear on my life, there were rumblings online of people saying that dungeons were back in Vengeance. As much as I was trying to avoid seeing trailers and advertisements, I still saw a few of them, and all of them had Shakan in them. Now, I should know better than to take online rumors seriously, but all signs were pointing to Shakan being some kind of massive new place to explore, and I really wanted that. So you can imagine how let down I was when I got there and found out it's essentially a reskin of the Demon King's castle. In the Vengeance route, Shakan replaces the Demon King's castle, and it's no better. In fact, the enemies that spawn in here appear to be the exact same, and even some of the rooms feel frighteningly similar. There is a new puzzle gimmick where you flip up onto the ceiling or some shit, but it's over fast, and all you get for your trouble is a fight against Abdiel. Not even a unique boss. I'm gonna keep it real with you, dungeons are absolutely not back in Vengeance. But jumping back to that open Shinjuku area, they did a badass job there. It's far better than any other map in the game. So my question is, was it too much to ask for more of that in this new campaign? Look, I know, Vengeance isn't supposed to be a totally fresh game, it's just a re-release, but it has been a few years, and the original game did sell a lot of copies. I would think they have the resources to do it. And if getting all new stages is unrealistic, how about at least changing the final area? Because I was enjoying the hell out of this place, right? And then the climax of the story starts, and I'm like, oh man, what's it gonna be next? And oh fuck, it's this place again. And not only that, it actually gets shortened in the Vengeance route. They condense 2 of the boss fights and make you fight both at once, and the whole area just goes by in a flash. I even think a viable, low-budget solution to throw in a little twist could have been reordering the maps. What if there was some shit in the story where you went to Taito early, or you played the first area last and maybe they switched some demons around? I'm just spitballing ideas here. Maybe you think that's stupid, but it's something, and it would have surprised me at the very least. Regardless, assuming this style of exploration is what they stick with in future games, Shinjuku does give me more hope for how things will turn out, and makes the Vengeance route unequivocally better than the original in my eyes. My other key complaint with the exploration last time around was that it really offered no sense of tension or challenge. I'm not trying to sound like a hard ass or something either, let's just break it down. First, there are no random encounters, which is fine, but you can run faster than just about any demon in the game. And very early on in the story, you unlock the ability to teleport back to checkpoints whenever you want, as long as it's not in a battle. This is a game with no resource management or risk-taking whatsoever. It's impossible to overextend yourself, and unless you outright die in a battle, any mistakes can be waved away. I know first-person dungeon crawlers with ballbuster dungeons aren't in fashion anymore, but aside from collecting Memon, there is nothing that tests you or really demands any sort of awareness or game sense. Does Vengeance improve on that? Not at all, although I can't say I really expected them to redesign the core gameplay loop for this release. Funnily enough though, the one thing you couldn't do in the original release was save anywhere you wanted. and this game does implement that. You might be expecting me to go on some kind of crack-fueled rant about how saving anywhere fucks up the balance even worse, but honestly, it's fine. Resource management already wasn't a thing in this game, so hey, why not? Save anywhere. And honestly, I have a job now and kinda like being able to just quit the game if I want to. I feel like whether you love or hate the exploration, you almost have to agree that it is incredibly hard to get yourself in a tough spot while walking around. Some may appreciate that and like this style. That's fine. Personally, combined with the way they throw you upgrades constantly, I just feel like a spoiled kid running around the neighborhood covered in bubble wrap. You know, it is what it is. I'm personally not a fan, so my opinion's unchanged. Overall, exploration is a bit better, and they do introduce some nice quality of life features, like a map that's easier to look at and a really neat sky view mode that's fun to play around with. But at the end of the day, I would say they still have a lot of work to do in making things more interesting in future games. At least half of the runtime of this entire channel is talking about dungeons in the series. Sure, there have been some pretty bad ones, but I think overall, Atlas is great at creating tense and immersive stages. I even think Apocalypse had some good ones. If they're using this type of exploration in the future, they really need to hone in on their creativity and give us more like Shinjuku. There has to be a way to offer a challenging exploration experience while also appealing to modern sensibilities. I think it would help a lot. And now, here we go. Our final act. The story. Let's cut to the chase on the original campaign. I think it had an interesting concept, but the execution was very messy. The cast was barely in the game, and you had these corny-ass cutscenes that desperately wanted you to feel something, like the one where our character dramatically hugs this girl we barely even know before killing her. You also had characters that got these big introduction cards, and naturally, you think they're gonna do something in the story, but then like 35 hours pass, and you can't even remember what their name was. The way they wrote a lot of characters in this game felt like they heard fans saying that SMT games are about killing your friends, and they really took it to heart. So they made a whole squad of people you wouldn't feel that bad about obliterating whatsoever. This misfire is preserved in Vengeance in all of its original glory. Technically, with the new demon haunts and side quests, there's more dialogue, but it's like 98% the same thing. As I've mentioned several times by now, they also added a second story to the game. The original is now called The Canon of Creation, and the new one, The Canon of Vengeance. Practically all of the new cutscenes, dialogue, and etc. are in the Canon of Vengeance, which is kinda weird if you think about it. When they did Persona 5 Royal, the new story content was blended into the original game. The new content in Strange Journey Redux was the same way. But here, you have a divide. The Canon of Vengeance is entirely separate and has things that don't appear in the Canon of Creation. It's effectively two very similar yet different games in the same package. Before this came out, I would have imagined, with the original story's poor presentation, that they'd spend a lot of effort fixing it up. But they don't fix it at all, they just remake it into another one. In a way, I kinda respect it. They decided to just take it from the top. So, let's start off with the positives. The Canon of Vengeance spends much more time developing the main cast. The new character, Yoko, is a focal point of the story, and as a matter of fact, you spend much of the game exploring with her and Tao. Tao is an optimistic yet sensitive person, and Yoko is about the exact opposite, cynical and honestly a bit deranged. These two have differing opinions on damn near everything, and it's pretty entertaining watching how Tao reacts to the shit Yoko says. Initially, she kinda just goes along with it, but gradually starts to stand up for herself. Their interactions remind me a lot of the earliest Megami Tensei games, where your party members argue with each other, and you're kinda left in the middle to decide which one you're more in line with. Throughout the Vengeance route, you repeatedly face off against the Kadishtu, who are these nice ladies that want to destroy the world and establish a new reality free of any god's control. The designs are great, they're fun to fight, and I enjoyed seeing what they got up to. Yoko's fate is tied up with them, and as things progress, you see her start to realize her true purpose, and that maybe their cruel actions have a point. At the same time, Tao becomes more resolute in her own desire to see a world where people are safe and happy under a caring ruler. And of course, there can be only one. It's a relatively simple narrative structure. There's only two endings, Law and Chaos, and the progression is predictable, but it works. You're involved with the characters now, you fight with them, you fight against them, it's pretty decent. And while this story is focused around the girls, the other characters are also generally portrayed better than before. In particular, Yuzuru gets far more development. In this route, you get to see just how much he cares about his sister Miyazu. This guy tries so hard and beats himself up constantly because he can't protect her or the city. And what does he get for it? Well, he gets impaled. I felt pretty bad for him, which is a big step up from before. Dazai also gets a few more much needed scenes that establish him further as this loser that people are initially annoyed by. He very quickly starts kissing angel ass to gain power and experience, and when he finally gets a good taste of it, he goes off the rails. They do that funny scene again in this one where he rips his hat off and becomes evil. It's still just as cheesy, but at least there's more build-up. While it doesn't last long, the Vengeance route also gives you an opportunity to have Yuzuru and Dazai on your team, which is really good and very important. People don't often seem to talk about this, but there's a lot of implied storytelling and development by seeing what stats these characters have, what moves they use, their demons. It helps you imagine what they've been through and how they've changed since the game started. One of Yuzuru's demons has an ability called Witness Me, which makes me think of his drive to be this protector who can handle things on his own. It's little stuff like that that goes a long way in helping these characters have an impact. Even the Prime Minister gets more screen time. In fact, he's kind of like the highlight of the game now. Around halfway through, everything goes to shit, and Aogami has to sacrifice himself to keep you alive. With no other options, and the rest of the cast either dead or missing in action, the Prime Minister reveals his true identity as the deity Tsukiyomi, and then fuses with you in the goo chamber, which gives you a new Nahobino form. I love the new form, it's a really cool idea. One detail about it that stuck with me is they mention Aogami was created as a weapon, whereas Tsukiyomi's purpose is to be a leader or administrator. To me, that sounds like switching from a really high quality sword to a really nice office computer. It's a desperate move, not ideal by any means, but they make it work. In terms of what I didn't like about the story, it does often have this habit of seemingly raising the stakes to new heights, luring you in and getting you excited, and then backing down at the last second. A prime example of this is with the character Sahori. This poor girl gets bullied and abused relentlessly, and you really didn't get to see her much in the original game before you killed her. Now, this release is called Vengeance, and I was hoping Sahori would play a bigger role in it. For a while, the game actually does lean pretty hard into the idea of her getting revenge against her bullies, in a surprisingly dark way. During a nice school rooftop conversation in the sunset, Yoko out of nowhere just blurts out that Sahori needs to murder her bullies, and Tao, that crazy girl, actually considers it. And then the big moment finally comes, right? They're about to do it, and they decide not to. And then Sahori dies and never comes back. They take a character who was already barely in the game, and then unceremoniously kill her off again, right when things get really good. Did I actually think this game would depict high schoolers murdering each other with a glass shard? I don't know, it sure looked like it for a minute. Maybe it would be in poor taste. All I'm gonna say is, Sahori gets done dirty in both routes, and they definitely could have done so much more with her. It's such a missed opportunity to me that they didn't give her a Nahobino form, or her own ending, or anything really. They kinda do this with Dazai too. He accepts an offer from the angel Mastema for more power, and at this point in the story, he's still pretty normal, so you think his decline is now really gonna start, and maybe he'll start to cross the line until it reaches a boiling point. But no, the next time you see him, he's already a complete murderous dickhead. It feels like they skip a step and leave out the part where he actually, starts to transform into a psychopath. The additional scenes he gets before this do help his character, but surely something interesting happened between accepting the gift and becoming Turbo Instinct Jake Paul. Another one that stuck with me is at the very end of the game. The final few hours of the Canon of Vengeance are really fun and exciting. I ended up doing the law route, and the new final bosses are great. They're challenging, you get to see some awesome new designs, new music, new cutscenes. After I beat Tiamat, I thought the game would be over. And then there's another boss. And then I really thought it was over. But the game still kept going. My excitement was through the roof. I couldn't believe there would be more to it. But I should have known better that it would be Lucifer again. If you watched my original review, you'll know I wasn't really a fan of this dude in the canon of creation. In the original game, you go through all this work to get the secret ending, and they tell you you're the new creator and you can do anything. And then this edgy ass guy swoops in and says, well, actually, things are still gonna suck again someday because of the mandala system. The old cosmic checkmate. I get it. Shin Megami Tensei is all about nothing being permanent and conflict being everlasting. But it just felt cheap. It came off like the devs really thought people's jaws would drop when Lucifer started trauma dumping about all this horse shit at the last minute. But I wasn't feeling it. Anyway, Lucifer does this again at the end of the Vengeance route. You kill the new bosses, you're really hype, and then he just comes in and says, oh, do you want to be free of Mandala's machinations? Ugh, it just kinda kills the mood for me. It's not like a total surprise. You definitely know Lucifer's gonna show up at some point, but it being the last thing that happens again in this route left a bad taste in my mouth. At least in this one, he kinda says you're breaking free of the system, but it's like, who cares? In 5 minutes, when I turn this game off and go to sleep, I'm not gonna be thinking about how Lucifer said my universe broke free of some eternal chain one of the writers came up with while they were taking a shit. I'm gonna be thinking about the cutscenes and the content they actually show you. I still think the best game to handle the whole Great Will concept is Last Bible, because it manifests physically and you can smack it with a cane. I would have preferred if the Vengeance route didn't throw in Lucifer's TED Talk again, but he is inarguably crucial to the world of SMT5 even existing, so I know why they did it at least. Overall, the story of the canon of Vengeance is enjoyable. I like seeing the characters interact, I like the new villains, the new transformation is sick. It's a fun ride, and I don't regret spending my time with it. It plays things a little safe, and I still don't think it's quite as memorable as the other mainline titles, but it's not so far behind them this time. It is pretty bizarre that the original story is kinda left hung out to dry and treated as this pseudo-companion piece to the canon of Vengeance, but if they really didn't think it could be improved, I guess it's better to get this fully fledged separate route than another mess. Like I said in the exploration section, I feel more optimistic for the future than I did before. As we get ready to close things out, I do want to touch on just a few more things that didn't quite fit into any one category. First is the soundtrack. This is obviously prevalent throughout the combat, exploration, and the story, and it's very, very good. The Vengeance release adds a lot of new tracks. In particular, the Demon Haunts have great music, there are some excellent new battle themes, and it all comes together to form some of the series' best work. It was already good in the original release, and Vengeance absolutely succeeds at the tall order of making it even better. Hats off to the sound department. I don't know how they do it, but please, never stop. I also wanted to shout out the photo mode you can use in the Demon Haunts. This is a blast to mess around with. It's a pretty neat feature that lets you take a closer look at the character models, although you can't get too close or they disappear. I can only suspect this is anti-pervert technology, designed to prevent people from going up a demon's ass or something. I don't know, but fortunately on PC, there's a mod that lets you get closer. Hey, maybe I just want to take a really close look at Jack Frost's hat. You really don't know me. And finally, one final point of contention. DLC. This isn't quite the fault of the developers, so I'm not going to hold it against them. But it's something the suits at Atlas love to do, and I wouldn't feel good publishing this video if I didn't bring it up. In addition to the standard grinding DLC they offer, Vengeance has 2 subquests locked behind a paywall, and they cost $5 a piece, or you can get everything if you buy the Digital Deluxe at $70. These quests add in the ability to use the demons Konohana Sakuya and Dogda, who was featured in SMT4 Apocalypse. Look, I know this is the world we live in now, where every big budget release wants to sell you a premium package or offer extra purchases, but come on, this is the second release. You can't cut quests at launch from the second release. This definitive edition should have everything included at the base price. If they have to sell a deluxe edition, couldn't it be like a soundtrack download, or a digital game guide, or wallpapers or something? Not actual gameplay that was removed to be sold separately? I've heard some people say the Dogda quest isn't even that good, so if you don't buy it, you're not missing much. But that's aside from the point. I genuinely believe we're owed this quest, and I'm sure the actual game designers would agree. Getting complacent with this kind of thing is exactly what company executives want. It's not like I think this video is going to make a huge difference, but they did take the fanbase's gameplay criticisms into account, so who knows? SMT is all about changing the world according to your beliefs. So if you ever find me up in the Empyrean, rest assured, Dogda will not cost $5 in the next reality. Alright, let's finish this up. So, how would I rate Vengeance as a whole? Undeniably, it's better than the original release, which I gave a 6 out of 10. My gut instinct for this one is a 7.5 out of 10. Or, if you don't like scoring things that way, I'd say it's a B tier game. As far as Atlas re-releases go, this is solid, and they put a lot of work into improving things. Combat is excellent, the story's a step up, and they added in a great new environment. Why don't I give this game something like an 8 out of 10, or an A tier ranking? The simple truth is, it still largely misses the mark for me when it comes to creating an immersive world that's engaging to explore. They're getting better at it, but too much of the game is still mired in the monotony of those original maps. And when that's such a big part of the experience, I can't just push it aside. Dungeon crawling is such an important part of the series for me. I prefer the first-person games, and I'm not saying future titles should be in first person, but I would think they can translate some of the variety and gimmicks of first-person exploration over into something that suits this modern style. Imagine if Dot had something like weather mechanics that changed how demons would behave, or maybe forced you to take an alternative path. Imagine if they did a game in this engine that took place in a big dynamic city, and part of the challenge was actually learning the layout of the streets by paying attention to signs, landmarks, and shit like that. That's the kind of thing I want to see. A hostile world that truly demands your attention and care if you want to make it through alive. I even hosted a little poll just for fun on Twitter to see what other people thought. First person versus third person. And the results were maybe a little closer than you might think. Sure, a lot of the responses are likely from people who already watch this channel and like the games I talk about, but that still means out of this sample selection, there's a good chunk of people who still prefer the kinds of challenges the older titles offered. I'm very curious to see where the next mainline SMT game goes. Fingers crossed for a fully realized city in third person, on par with something like Tokyo Millennium from SMT2. If they did that, I'd shit my pants. So I guess, to sum it all up, if you liked the original Shin Megami Tensei V experience, or you've never played it, I'd say this is worth picking up. If you didn't, honestly, I wouldn't spend $70 or $60 on this. I'd recommend checking it out at some point, but definitely at a discount. I'd like to thank Atlas for providing me with a review code for this game, as well as you for listening to me talk about all this. I'd love to hear your input on Vengeance too. It's still fairly new, and something I've noticed is that every time I talk about it with someone, I'll hear a different opinion on something. It's a lot of fun to see how new players like certain mechanics, and how longtime fans react to the changes. So feel free to spill it if you want to. As always, I'll see you guys in the next video.